Hello and welcome once again to SFF 180 Horror. On this episode, a group of teenage friends reunite years later as adults in the Chesapeake Bay town where they grew up to face the consequences of their roles in a deadly tragedy in small town horror. That's the book I'm reviewing. Hello again, everyone. Thomas here, your host as always. Great to be back. Thank you so much for joining me. When you drive through any lonesome little town on your way to someplace far more populated and important, you'll glance at the ramshackle motels and the boarded-up local businesses that were once thriving before the Walmart opened up a few miles down the highway. And if you're a horror fan, your imagination goes places, making you think it would be a good idea not to stop, not even for gas or a cheeseburger. Nope. Just keep on driving, because there's already something sinister here, and lingering too long after dark might be bad for your health. Generally speaking, every small-town horror story is a form of Americana. Stephen King, that most American of all horror writers, has made it his trademark. Now, in real life, small American towns present a pleasant Norman Rockwell face to the world. It's the dream of comfort and safety and happy families, a place where mom's freshly baked pies still cool on windowsills, and children play on swings and ride bikes without the innocence-destroying interference of smartphones, let alone the terror of predatory adults. Now, I happen to live in exactly this kind of small town where tourists show up on weekends to wander in and out of charming antique shops while enjoying their ice cream cones from the general store. But I've also served on the grand jury here, and I can tell you, all the same human evils that you'd find in any major city are lurking here too. Now, I've noticed a number of horror novels in the early 2020s following a trend of leaning into some of the genre's beloved, tried and true tropes, not to subvert or interrogate them, but to celebrate them and revel in their possibilities. Now, Malfi's premise in his new book is one we all know. A group of former teenage friends are forced to reunite years later as adults to face the consequences of a terrible and tragic mistake they can no longer run from. Now, variations on this theme can be found in classics like Peter Straub's Ghost Story, all the way to dozens of slasher movies where the revenant of the victim of a brutal crime or a prank gone wrong returns to exact bloody vengeance. Horror fans have all been down this dark and spooky road many times. And in small-town horror, Malfi sets out to spin a tale that will deliver on readers' expectations rather than overrule them. Andrew Larimer is a thriving Manhattan attorney whose wife, Rebecca, has a baby on the way. In every detail, he seems to be living the dream. But Andrew grew up in Kingsport, a Maryland town on Chesapeake Bay, and he is the only one of his old high school clique of friends to escape a dead-end life there. Now, Andrew has begun having bad dreams about his wife's pregnancy, which he puts down to typical new parent anxiety. Then, out of nowhere, he gets a call from Dale Walls, one of his old friends. Dale insists that Andrew must return to Kingsport immediately. He won't give any details, only stressing the urgency. And so Andrew goes, because he suspects he knows the reason. Now, the fact that Andrew lies to his wife about where he's going tells us not only that the situation is dire, but that his choice to lie is going to come back to bite him. Andrew returns to his father's old empty house, which is overrun with flies and has the kind of creepy flooded basement that any good small-town horror location has to have. I'm imagining something like Zillow, exclusively for horror homes in which, flooded basements and sounds in the walls and portraits with eyes that follow you around the room are choice amenities, sort of the way normal homes promote newly remodeled kitchens. Maybe there would be horror real estate agents on TikTok, telling you how to boost your equity by redoing the grout in your secret kill room under the stairs. Anyway, cutting to the chase, we do learn of a tragedy that took place back in 2003, over July 4th weekend, back when they were rowdy teens drinking beer in the back of a pickup. The tragedy was linked to a reclusive woman, Ruth Graves, living on the outskirts of town with her son and daughter, whom everyone thinks is a witch. This is also a feature of small-town horror. There always has to be the feared outcast. We know how weird Ruth Graves is because her yard is decorated with life-size dolls of children made up of straw and bird feathers. And you would never get away with that if your neighborhood had an HOA. It is now closing in on July 4th, 2023, and the chickens, or buzzards as the case may be, are coming home to roost. Andrew meets with Dale, a once successful real estate developer who is now on the brink of bankruptcy thanks to a poorly planned subdivision. Dale's unfaithful wife has gone missing, and Dale insists it's a curse stemming from their actions 20 years before. And this belief is also very strong with Meech, the one friend who ended up a homeless junkie, whom Andrew finds squatting in his father's house. Meech tells alarming stories of seeing ghosts out on the bay. Now, of course, we know it's not the booze or the drugs talking. 2 more of the gang have stayed in Kingsport as if the town itself is holding them hostage. Tig Mayron, who was Andrew's crush back then, now has a young daughter who has lately taken to sleepwalking, sometimes all the way out into the cold waters of the bay. And on one of these harrowing nights, Tig insists she too saw something. Finally, Eric Kelly has taken on his father's old job as deputy sheriff, a chip off the old block, despite the fact that the old block was a frequent source of abuse. Eric doesn't hold to these ideas of a curse, but he knows something is very wrong, and he is determined to keep more official eyes, such as the Attorney General's office, as far from them and Kingsport as he can, even if he has to bend some laws himself to do it. Malfi has always been extremely good at letting character propel the emotional engine of the story. It's the skill that earns him favorable comparison to King. These characters aren't innocent victims. They're really not good people. Except perhaps for Tig, the only one of them back in 2003 who really seemed to grasp the sheer reality of what happened and the fullness of its moral ramifications. Now, we already know Andrew, our viewpoint narrator, acts selfishly and without thinking it through, with all of his lies to both his wife and his firm back in New York. And Meech is such a crushed person, so inescapably bound to his self-destructive cycle that any pity we feel for him is the muted kind we might feel for anyone who ultimately has nothing and no one to blame for his situation other than his own weaknesses. And as for Eric, well, his take-charge attitude and his readiness to further their culpability, to escape responsibility, makes it apparent he's the kind of bad cop who would shoot a motorist and then throw down a weapon. And yet, while we don't really like these people, Malfi makes their ordeal compelling. Much of small-town horror feels like a procedural. In its horror elements, Malfi prefers to start with a light touch, ramping up to grander set pieces. The supernatural lurks in the background, providing mood rather than overt scares. Atmospheric details like the flooded basement, or the ever-present birds, or even the holiday fireworks that always seem to be happening in the distance, as if to remind us that normal life is so close and yet so far away. All this adds to a chilling vibe. Now, some of these things end up having a clear role in events, while others are less clear. But overall, small-town horror is about the corrosive nature of unresolved guilt, of living a life of dishonesty and unaccountability, and how that only ever just tears apart friendships and families, and ultimately yourself. I can't say this is the very best book I've ever read from Ronald Malfi. The ending, while it is a suitable resolution, feels very abrupt. And while certain surprises, especially one big reveal near the end, are impressively well crafted and clever, some others feel a bit obvious, if not altogether forced. But small-town horror is still an admirably dark and malevolent American nightmare, a story that will only reinforce your desire to drive right through those haunted little highway towns and keep driving. And that is all I have time for on this episode of SFF 180. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please hit that like button. Share the video far and wide with all of your SFF and horror reading friends, and above all, please subscribe if you've not done so. That is how the channel grows. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store, or at my Buy Me a Coffee page, or at my Patreon, We're recruits into Mike's army, occasionally get little perks like early access to some of my videos, but mostly the purpose of the Patreon, the purpose of all of the available ways that you can crowdfund, is to pay Matt Olson, my brilliant and amazing channel artist who does all of my incredible thumbnails and things for me, and so all of that additional support is very much appreciated. And I also want to thank all the rest of you for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube, and until I see you next time, and not such a long time I promise, please stay safe, stay healthy, and spooky reading.